saw the resurrected Jesus. Do you have a better witness? I didn't think so. All right. 3 years later, I spoke to Peter and James, the brother of Jesus. For 15 days, I went over this. So I knew their testimony as well as mine. Better sources? I didn't think so. Okay. This is at least the third time I've checked out the message. Jesus, Peter and James. And now I'm coming back again just to make sure we're staying on the same page. And this time, who's in Jerusalem? Now, Titus and Barnabas are there, and they're big names. I just came from a big conference this last week, and I've got to go to another one, Lord willing, in 3 weeks. Huge apologetic conference. There are 2,000 people there Saturday. You hear a bunch of speakers from all over. And they had plenary speakers and breakout sessions. And if you know how it goes, the breakout sessions, 4, 5, 6, 10, go on at the same time. Well, Titus and Barnabas would have been breakout speakers. You know, today, if they were in Lynchburg, you would have come from all over to hear those two speak. But with the guys they were with, they were breakout speakers. Paul, plenary speaker. Peter, plenary speaker. James, the brother of Jesus, the pastor of the largest church in the ancient world, plenary speaker. And who else is there? John, the son of Zebedee. Folks, in terms of influence, or in terms of New Testament writing, you cannot name 4 more influential names than Paul, James, the brother of Jesus, John, and Peter. 2 of the 12 and 2 other apostles, the brother of Jesus and the prophet, the persecutor, whom God met personally. They're all here. Paul said, I set before them the gospel I was preaching to make sure we're all on the same page. And then just a few verses later, he adds 5 words in English. They added nothing to me. They added nothing to me. What's that mean? Even when I appeared before the big 3, they didn't presume to change my message. They knew we were on the same page. Then Galatians 2:9, they gave Barnabas and me the right hand of fellowship. That's where we get that phrase, the right hand of fellowship. Folks, you don't lay hands on somebody and say, you're one of us. You take the gospel to the Gentiles, Peter will take it to the Jews, as they say there, if you don't think they're legit in terms of their history and their theology. They laid hands on him and said, go get him. They added nothing to me. Great comment. All right, so this is an extension, because there's only one new guy there, John, but he's very important. The other 3 are all back here. Now watch closely. This is when Paul heard their message at +5 or +6. And remember, we want early eyewitness testimony. We're going to get all the way back to the cross. That's how good this testimony is. You say, well, how are you going to span this gap here? All right. This is when Paul heard their message. This is when Paul saw Jesus for himself. There's still a 2 to 3 year gap. There's a 5 to 6 year gap from here. But Paul heard their testimony here. But the 2 men who gave it to him, the critics think he received it from Peter and James. Richard Bauckham, Cambridge University, New Testament scholar, he says this is the consensus position of New Testament scholars. Consensus position that Paul received this material right here, 35-ish AD, from Peter and John. But if they gave Paul their testimony, they had it before Paul had it, right? Here's when they give it to Paul. They had the testimony before they gave it to Paul. Now, this is a whole other topic. Maybe somebody want to ask a question about it. 1 Corinthians 15:3 and following. Arguably, it's possible there's no passage of Scripture that's more spoken of today by critical scholars. And it's called an early creedal text. It's one of dozens of little tiny passages in the New Testament that are much earlier than the book in which they appear. In other words, they first consisted of oral teaching or oral preaching, and then they were written down for the first time in the 50s or afterward. 1 Corinthians 15 in the Greek reads like this. Dot, 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 dot. It reads in 2 stanzas. It doesn't rhyme like English does. But it was clearly the way you would start strumming a song, and then you'd say, I'm going to put some words to this. But it takes a while to get the melody together. It takes a while to work the kinks out. It takes a while to put words to it. But 1 Corinthians 15 is one of those early teaching passages. So, Paul hears it here. They had it before they gave it to Paul. And it takes a while to chalk this message up and get it in a dot, 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 dot order. And that takes us all the way back. In fact, 3 of the most influential critical scholars today, Larry Hurtado, an American, but he just retired after years of being the department head in religion at Edinburgh University. Larry Hurtado, Richard Bauckham, the aforementioned, Cambridge University, and James D.G. Dunn, who's as influential historical Jesus scholar as anybody. The 3 of them have all said that in 30 A.D., coming out of the blocks, 30 A.D. These 2 messages have to be present in 30 A.D. or you don't have Christianity. These 2 messages. A high view of the deity of Jesus and the resurrection. Of course, if he was raised, he was dead. So you've got deity, death, resurrection, what we call the gospel. And these fellows say, in 30 A.D., it was present. Coming out of the blocks, we have the message from back here. Once again, Paul heard them say it. They knew their testimony before they told Paul, and it takes a while to put this into a standard form. How long? Well, according to Dunn, James D.G. Dunn, the latest this material could have been put to verse, so to speak, dot, 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 dot. The latest this could have happened is 6 months after the cross. So I think it's 30 AD, great. 6 months later, they finished putting these words and everything in order. Well, I think he died in 33, great. 6 months later, the time's the same. 6 months later, this was all made into an oral testimony that could be easily memorized by people who were illiterate. For all we know, 90% of Jesus' listeners were illiterate. Or at least, let's just say up to 90%. So they had to do this in a form. I said 2nd graders earlier, I said 8th to 12th graders. They had to do this for people who couldn't read or write, but could carry on the message. And that's why they do it in da-da-da-da-da-da form. Right? I mean, even kids can remember, Mary had a little lamb whose fleece was white as snow. Right? Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. And you'll never forget those words. Or depending on when you were born, you know, She Loves You by the Beatles. You're going to know those words. How many of you know the words that She Loves You? Oh, you guys are too young. Come on. You start. How about I Want to Hold Your Hand? All right, more hands. Mark, he's a Beatle fan. You watching this? It's pretty cool. When we have music going with it, you can remember the words easier. See, Philippians 2 is thought to be a Christological hymn. Talking about a very high view of Jesus. Every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. They may have sung that in the early church. And you don't forget words when you sing them, even if you're illiterate. You might not be able to write the words down, but you can say them. That's the power of this. And now, just the latest to get on board with this argument. Bart Ehrman, the skeptic's skeptic. Agnostic leaning toward atheist, best known skeptic in America. In his new book, Did Jesus Exist?, where he goes after the guys who say Jesus probably never lived. This is Bart Ehrman talking, with critic sources, not evangelical sources. I mean, the sources are the same, but he treats them critically, not as evangelicals do. Yeah, so many independent sources, according to Bart Ehrman. How many independent sources do we have for the fact that Jesus died on the cross? Right here. Now remember, the Jesus Seminar, as liberal as they are, the Jesus Seminar says if you have 2 independent sources for something, that makes it a lot more likely that it's true. 2 independent sources. Bart Ehrman at least 11 independent sources for the crucifixion of Jesus. 11. When someone says, yeah, but your book's a book of mythology, with 11 independent sources, 11 independent sources. If you need 11 sources for crossing the Rubicon, Caesar would never have done it. Or at least you wouldn't know he did. 11. Well, what does Habermas say about this little deal that I just did here? Several times in his book, he says we can take the earliest Christian message back to within 1 year of the cross. That's Habermas. That's about as skeptical as it gets. And he will concede back to 1 year before the cross. I'm going to tell you something, folks. Most evangelicals don't know this argument. Most evangelicals don't learn this argument. And if you ask most evangelicals, how early are your earliest sources? They probably say, that's assuming, this is the ones that know, Paul, about plus 25, Mark, at about plus 40. Of course, they'd say, I dated about 35. And they're earliest sources. But we're missing the boat. 25 and 35 are great. But Habermas says several times we can get this material to within a year of the cross. Within a year of the cross. Why is he a skeptic? You'll have to ask him when you meet him. I wish he lived next door to me, and I wish he loved football. Saturday's a good day. A lot of top 20 matches. And it'd be cool if Bart was in my living room and I could be making fun of this football team and talking about the story of Jesus. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I usually do this little bombastic kind of ending, and I'm going to leave that off for right now. But what I'm saying is we can get back in time. Someone might say, well, what about the naturalistic theories? What if you could make something up and say, this is all well and good, but Jesus didn't really rise to the dead. What really happened was fill in the blank. I'll tell you what, take the mic and propose whatever one you want, and we'll discuss it. Because what I'm going to suggest is the same facts that tell you we got it early and from eyewitnesses are able to refute any other alternative you come up with. In fact, today, what if I told you most critics do not come up with alternative theories? Most critics don't come up with alternative theories. In fact, I was debating a guy once, and he was an atheist on campus. He was a Christian debater. He was a Christian hater. In fact, I was there when he challenged this football player. The guy said like one positive thing about Christianity. Who knows if he was a Christian? But the professor was a little guy, and he got so mad that this big football player made a comment. He challenged the kid to a fight in the class. He was not very happy with Christians. The big guy should have just said, come on outside. But he had to get a grade for the guy. So, all right, well, I debated this guy. And when we debated, he said to me, oh, the doors on this college, the doors, it said no smoking, no smoking, no smoking, no smoking over every door. And he got in there, took his pipe out, lit it up. Pipe in his mouth. People talk with a pipe in their mouth. And he said, so we got into this thing, and I started explaining this, and he goes, Habermas, you're starting to get me in a corner, and I don't like it. I said, why don't you just pick a naturalistic theory? Why don't you just tell me what you think happened if it's not the supernatural? Not going to do it. Why not? Because then you're going to paint me into a corner and I'm not going to look too good. I said, but isn't that your view? You're a naturalist. All naturalists paint themselves in a corner. Right? And then he said this. As far as I'm concerned, this debate is over. And he wouldn't talk anymore. He wouldn't talk. Now, his field was not philosophy or religion. He was an English literature professor. In other words, you can guess how postmodern he was and everything else. But he just thought there were no such thing as facts, and he tried that, and it didn't work. And he didn't want to go any further. He didn't want to make up a theory because he didn't want to get cooked. And he quit talking. quit talking. We're done. We're done talking. It's probably my first debate. I have to go back and think about that. It's probably the first debate I ever had. And he's done. So, pardon? If someone doesn't answer your questions, you win a debate. Right. They've got to answer your questions, just like you have to answer theirs. All right, where are we going to start for questions? But my point is, if you want to take an altruistic theory and check it out, go for it. There's one right over here.
So I was listening, and I actually kind of didn't think that any of those arguments about the age of the sources were necessary. Because what I've noticed is that I've observed that we have myths about real historical figures, but it's worth more myths. And I also observed that, like, contemporary figures, I've seen made up stories